Joy comes from grace being recognized in my life. So that really is the definition of it. It does mean happy. However, the deeper and the more alive it is, it's because I have recognized the grace of God somewhere in my life.
Well, hi, Sandra. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Happy Saturday.
Happy Saturday to you too. It's been gorgeous here.
It
Hope it's
has.
been that way.
Well, I'm very happy that you chose to take a little bit of time with us. I know Saturdays for you are probably pretty nuts.
They're nuts inside my head, but less on my calendar. But that's okay. That's okay.
Um, I'll get right to it. There are a few topics that I have been holding in reserve that I want to pick your brain about and get not just the biblical perspective, but the Sandra Clay perspective. So so here we go. This one was inspired by my daughter. I was having a conversation with her, and she related to me that she spent a lot of time feeling overwhelmed and helpless. And mainly, I think she was referring to finances. And she said, Dad, that Gen Zs and millennials, a lot of them feel like they're in this pit and they just can't dig their way out. Basically, you could either go work at a fast food place or some, $15 to $18 an hour job and
Right.
just barely skim and barely make ends meet. Or you could go to some sort of trade school like nursing school, which is what she had been looking into, and come out 4 years later, $300,000 in debt to a job that you make, $40,000 or $50,000 a year. She said both of those seem like they're impossible, and she's saying, well, that's just paying for me. What about if I have a kid? What about if I have any expenses, any dependents? What if I want to buy a car? What if one day I have a dream of getting a house? I just wanted to hear your take on that because it occurred to me that maybe we grew up in different times, and that dilemma that she faces, that hopelessness that she faces, and she's a very capable young lady. I can only imagine if people don't have skills, what they feel like. But
Right.
I wanted you to address that overwhelm that someone in their 20s, maybe even 30s, might be feeling these days about just being stuck where they are and not having a reasonable way out.
I think it's very interesting listening to you kind of set the parameters here because I know that my field of work is not the only one, but this is not a new problem. For instance, it is not a lucrative choice to go into ministry because, especially as churches have declined attendance, membership, we think about what it means to be the church differently, and so there are fewer dollars coming in. Designated just for church. We have become the kind of givers that look at all of our options across the board, and so we're spreading our dollars thinner. That means when you finish all of your training, including seminary, sometimes even farther than that, for a long time, for even for those who came before me, we've had this same dilemma. And I mention that because my guess is your daughter is also thinking of her life as a gift from God that's been entrusted to her, but a life that she's also very wants to be very tender about, but also bold about sharing with the world. And that makes this decision even harder to follow where you think your giftedness is, where your passion is, to be able to receive the kind of training that will make you the kind of nurse or the kind of artist or the kind of minister that you know you can be. And that sense of overwhelm is about, in my opinion, and in a little of my experience, is about wanting to do big things for God and for God's world, but also feeling like my humanness and the structures of this world limit that already. So it's a catch 22 no matter what no matter what you do. If it's just about what kind of dollars they can earn and how we can support our families, it would be an easy choice um, to move into work that was a little more lucrative, that would help you pay the bills off quicker, even if you go into debt. But it's the knowing that I'm not going to get the same financial return, and the emotional return, the spiritual return, don't keep the lights on. And so that overwhelm is not just about the physicalities of our life. How am I going to keep the bills paid? How am I going to take care of my child or my children? How am I going to get back and forth to work, having a working vehicle? It's about the exchange of our lives, I think.
Mm, yes, yes. I love that you ended with that word exchange, because the word that comes to mind for me is a trade that we make.
Yes.
And that trade is the trade is doing something maybe that you don't find compelling, that you're not passionate about, but something that you have to do because it makes more financial sense. And that trade that we make, some people go to an extreme and do a job they absolutely hate for decades just to pay the bills and support their family, and that's a very noble thing in some sense. But the thing that you brought up about, I had not even put that in the equation, funny enough, about aligning with God's purpose for you, and the overwhelm not just being a financial matter of I can't pay my bills, but a knowing that we're here for some important purpose, and we just have that kind of gnawing sense that
Right.
I'm not in alignment with that purpose. And
Right.
that can feel overwhelming too, because often if you choose to take the leap into some unknown abyss that, follow your dreams, as they say, and without any security, that's a terrifying thing.
It is.
Yeah, so maybe the overwhelm equally comes from that. It comes from what you just said, which is that um, you're not feeling supported and thrust forward by God's purpose for you. You're just kind of
Right. There is a powerful thing though about being in God's purpose or discovering the depth of your giftedness, or the even if it's the depth of your surrender and your skills are not particularly special or widespread. Max Lucado wrote once about the sweet spot of our lives, and the metaphor was referencing the sweet spot in a tennis racket. Now I don't know a thing about tennis, but there's this sweet spot evidently in the racket, and it's different for everybody because of the length of your arm span or the strength of your swing. But in that sweet spot, then the capacity of that racket uh, added to your physical training, your stamina, the kind of swing that you offer, launches that ball in an exponential way. So being in the will of God offers to us something that's not just an equalizer. It there's an exponential kind of I don't even know the right word. There's an exponential kind of energy when we are living in our giftedness and when it is surrendered to the things that God has made us sensitive to or has called us to. And we really don't know how to measure those things, except to say, did you feel that, or did you hear? I mean, we don't know how to talk about that. And I think that's what makes that sense of being overwhelmed so hard to deal with, because it feels like we are losing a if I make a lesser decision, that I'm losing more than just X, Y, and Z. I'm losing a part of myself.
hmm. Yeah, and I wonder if even that enters into the equation for some people, because they haven't even asked themselves where they need to be, or what drives them, or they haven't given themselves enough quiet away from all the influences of social media and just the consumerism and just things that put in your head what you ought to be. And if there's no space, if there's no silence to listen for that inner voice and listen for the direction God is pointing you in, then you very easily could end up in completely the wrong spot, chasing someone else's life.
And that may be that exponential force at work in the negative way too. Can you imagine? Now I have invested all of this time and money receiving an education and training for a particular work, because mama or daddy told me that this would really be a great way for me to go, and then I I loathe my job. I don't feel good about what I've contributed to. My bills are mounting, and I don't seem to have pleased those who told me this is what I should do. That's that exponential um, downward spiral that could lead us to that overwhelm. And I think you're really onto something. I don't know that we really free people very well in the church to think about what it means to live into your giftedness.
Yeah, that's a very important question to ask, and one that sometimes you can go. Myself as an example, you can go decades without even thinking about that. Just thinking, well, there has to be a bucket of gold at the end of this thing that I'm on. Like you don't even
Right.
stop to think if it's the right thing. If you have the old cliche about having your ladder up against the right building.
Well, success leads to that. That's what we've been taught, or that's what the world would. I don't want to over spiritualize that, but all of the voices that we listen to, in addition to God's, give us kind of a formulaic hint about what things should feel like and look like and sound like for us if we're moving in the right direction. And the return on the investment of my money in education or in training or in paying my dues, um, is to be rewarded. If I am successful, it will be rewarded with a return of that. We just don't know if we can hang on long enough uh, to get there. That's that first level of angst. And then that deeper level of overwhelm, like your daughter was asking about, is that I don't know if I even want to do this long enough to find out. It just doesn't feel like it's a match for me, or it's costing me more to care for my daughter, to keep up with the bills, to make sure everything in my life is running, especially the car. That's requiring more of me than I'm getting from this work.
Yeah, and then that statistic you hear that many American households are like, they only have $200 of income in their bank account to use for an emergency, or maybe even less than that. And that's got to be nerve wracking. Yeah, I don't. So it seems like that your suggestion would be, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but staying connected to God, even in that circumstance. I even in that place where there's a lot of mental noise and a lot of external influences and feeling helpless, and that maybe is the time to strengthen your connection to God. But I see, like you said, and I, being a recently becoming a Christian, I see all around me, like you said, that churches are kind of going in it is not a thriving
Right.
thing. It's kind of almost going the other way. It seems like almost, the social media and the Facebook ads and all these things that are saying, no, forget about God. You can be happy if you have the right car, or if you have a beautiful girlfriend, or if your butt is tight, or whatever they're trying to sell you,
Right.
instead of actually going inside and feeling the divinity inside you and letting that be your propellant. That's a foreign strategy, I think, for a lot of people in
Yes.
their 20s and 30s.
Yes. Well, and I the as you're talking, Faramarz a couple of things come to my mind, and uh, when you use that metaphor that all of us, I think, may be familiar with now, of which wall your ladder is leaning against. Solomon writes in Proverbs that we are to not lean on our own understanding. That's not to dismiss our own understanding. Matter of fact, John Wesley would tell us that our own gift of reason has to be a part of it, but of our figuring things out in life. But there are some things that should carry more weight, and primary among them is the Word of God, how God speaks to us most often. And so when we get to those places in the New Testament, when Paul in particular says, don't stop meeting together, that's where I feel like we've lost a lot of the power of the church, is that, especially now with social media and coming on the heels of a pandemic, we take for granted the power that comes in meeting together and staying together long enough that we really know one another, that we're looking into each other's eyes, that our words really do fall on top of one another when we are praying in community, that we lift our voices in song so that we hear the harmony of how I sing things or say things differently than you do, but we're speaking the same truth. And those are the kinds of things that we have generations coming after yours and mine that don't understand, because they have been taught to value these other good things. What if they're both valuable? And the church, I don't think, in historically has been good at both and language. We tend to make people choose
Mm.
which is the most valuable, because then we can help. Oh, anyway, I think I want to say this. I think we would like to be able to shame or guilt or push someone into making a decision that's going to benefit the church.
Mm.
We're scared too. The
Right.
church as an institution is also afraid that we're not going to have enough money. Is all the work that we've done really going to do what is necessary for us to continue? We are having the same kind of dilemma, and so our a lot of our hard work is not about leaning on the insight or understanding of God as much as it is what side hustle do we need to do to make sure that we've got more butts in the pew, so we've got more dollars in the plate. At the same time, the world is saying you don't have to be present. You just click that button and turn on, a digital version of church, and that's good enough. Um, it depends on how you define church.
So,
So,
so two comments. One, you hit upon something very, I think it's worthy of emphasizing, and that is that even the church feels that same helplessness that my daughter was
yes.
expressing to me. So that idea of not fully trusting in the divine and having human concerns about human things.
Yes.
So that's the first thing, and I hope I can remember the second point. I think it's already passed, because but that's such a fascinating insight that I didn't even consider, that that same overwhelm, that feeling of overwhelm and that disconnection is on an individual level, or it can be on a church level. But it's a great insight that even the church feels that, and the answer
And
is the
we,
same to the church.
right. And I think what to be able to name it at this particular time, Fairmares, because at the close of this week, we're going to remember those who've been following Jesus, whether you've been doing that for a day or you've been doing that for 1,000 years. We're going to remember together as he prayed in the garden, fully God, but fully human. If there is another way, this does not feel good. I really want to do this, but I really don't want to do this. If the Son of God can wrestle with that and come out on the other side, then we can too. The discomfort is not what we ought to be avoiding. But embracing that it is going to feel uncomfortable, but we already have the agency, we have the power, we have the insight, not just of our own, but from God Himself. If we will be quiet, that is counterculture. If we will be still, that is counterculture as well. And allow that to become our own, then somehow, now I don't want it to sound like I'm waving a magic wand and everything is going to be better, because there's a lot that happens between the Garden of Gethsemane and Easter morning, and it does not feel good at all for anybody involved. But that's that same thing. Jesus is wrestling with the same kinds of things. Whoa, is this really going to be worth it?
Interesting. That's so we're using this medium, you and I, right now, this internet medium, to have this conversation. So it is a remarkable tool. The thing that I was thinking about, that the second point that just came back to me, was this idea of, and you do a broadcast of your service, and we've listened to it, and it's if we can't be to the actual thing, it's the next best thing.
That's right.
But the problem, I think, arises if, and it's happened, and again, speaking from personal experience, we have this little bitty church that's 5 minutes from my house, but because I travel so much, it's been difficult getting to church, and our pastor does record the thing just for people like us, or people who are infirm and can't make it to church, older people or whatever. So you think, well, there is that decision that sometimes you're like, well, I could get in my car and drive there and sit there, and I now have to deal with all these people and the drain and the energy drain of, or I could just sit here in my bed and sip my coffee and watch him on TV, basically. You're correct that switching to that electronic medium is not a substitute.
Right.
It's not the same. It's a poor copy of it, because what you're missing, you may be hearing the noises, you may be seeing the things, but you're missing that energy that you share with the other people in the church, and the embrace that you get at church. That's the thing that you can't get watching a computer screen.
That's exactly right. And so what it has been, this is not a new phenomenon either. I grew up in the Memphis area, and so Bellevue Church was one of the first to be able to broadcast on television their service. Fairly early into my ministry, I discovered across the street neighbors who did not live we were not in Shelby County, who considered themselves members of the Bellevue congregation, but they never darkened the door there. So if membership in or attending church is about information, I'm hearing a sermon on something of scripture, I'm being informed about the spiritual life. You never are forced to practice it if you will not be in community. And so when you show up and walk through the door, then all of a sudden, I don't just see the back of someone's head and the pastor's face. I see the posture of that mother who is also caring for her mother at the same time she's caring for her children because of illness. I also see the tension between this person or the other person. One of the other things I would say too is, like, when we're doing things with this marvelous technology, if we were to try to sing together right now, we would be so out of sync because of the way we perceive our own voices and how they layer on top of one another. It's the same thing if I'm going to attend by watching television or by watching on the screen. It is a great next best thing. But there is something about hearing my voice added to the choir of everybody else in the room who is singing. And we just don't get that. So when Paul says, don't stop meeting together, it's not just about the great music. It's about encouraging one another, spurring one another on. When I'm flagging, you're probably having a stronger day, and vice versa. And we miss those things. transformation is what this spiritual journey is all about. So when someone like your daughter, or if I had children who are now wrestling with what do I do with my life, I want to do this, but I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills. We get to share that journey together. It's not just about the world's version of success, but this transformation that happens when I yield myself and I trust in my giftedness, and that God, who is our provider, will give me what I need. Now, we also don't know the difference between need and want often, but will we trust? I mean, it is a journey of transformation,
Mm,
not just information.
perfect. Yeah, and what came to mind as you were saying that is, I initially had, when I mentioned to you that I wanted to interview you, I said we wanted to talk about the topic of isolation and disconnection, and we've come right back around to that. So you can either sit in your house alone and go to chat gpt or just search the internet for the answer to these deep questions, or you can be part of a community where people put their arm around your shoulder and say, I went through this 20 years ago, and this is how I solved it. And even if they don't have the solutions, you can't get that support from a computer screen. You can hear the words, but you don't feel that this person loves me and will be there when I need them.
That's right.
So we are back to
Solidarity.
isolation, and we are back
That's
to the
exactly right.
topic of isolation.
Solidarity, companionship. Those are the things that we don't get. We may get the solution to whatever our dilemma is, but we do not get companionship, and we were not created to be alone. Matter of fact, that's the one thing God said. You've heard me say this a jillion times, but that's the one thing God said was not good about creation. And in that first story, there are two stories that tell the creation story. One is in chapter 1 of Genesis, the second one is in chapter 2. One is more poetic, the second one is more narrative. And in both of them, there was a time where the first human being was alone with animals and with trees and everything else. But God was able to bear witness to this unequal kind of relationship. And it was not good that humanity be alone. But we put ourselves in that place all the time. Sometimes we don't perceive that we have a choice, we don't believe we have a choice. But and I that may be very Pollyanna-ish of me to say I think we always have a choice, but because there are consequences, it may feel like we don't.
There are a lot of forces that, if you listen to them, convince you that you're alone, and especially
That's right.
online. There are forces that stand to gain by us feeling disconnected and isolated,
That's exactly right.
because that inner feel of lack that we have, that when family's not there, when friends aren't there, when your church community isn't with you, that sense of lack is what you're going to try to cover with the salve, with the ointment of buying things and drinking and drugs and social
Right.
media and porn or whatever it takes to kind of just get
Hmm.
yourself through that. So, there's actually studies that people that are socially isolated die sooner. It increases mortality rates if you're isolated and alone.
And I'm wondering if there's a twofold thing that happens when we put ourselves in community. And one that we shy away from is that we're going to be held accountable. I may not want to answer to this particular person if they were to ask me how I'm doing or why I'm doing this or why I've decided not to do that. But the other aspect of this, the other side of the coin, is God is trusting us with each other. So I'm the one who is a part of holding another person, other people accountable. That keeps me tender in ways, and being held that way um, keeps me tender in the ways that I don't abuse that power. if I'll be true to myself, one of our former bishops, Bishop Ken Carter, used to call that being held at the same time we are held accountable.
Right. That balance is very important because otherwise you're a Pharisee. If you're standing around saying
That's
you're not doing
exactly
it
right.
right, you're not doing it right. Um, yeah, none of
That's
us are
exactly right.
fit to
That's
judge.
exactly. Yes, yes, yes.
Mm. And the community, that sense of community, you'd say, well, why don't I don't need to go to church. I'm just going to go sit at Starbucks. That's community, right? Well, not really. It's a whole different thing when you spend an hour reflecting about the role God plays in your life, thinking about the things you're afraid of happening, thinking about how you can change your inner self to become a better human being versus just going and sitting in a bar with a bunch of people. It's not the same thing. And that's why I think that's what you're referring to, that it's easy to go out to eat, but church can be hard sometimes if you're doing it right. Church makes you ask yourself difficult questions,
Yes.
which are necessary for you to grow and to become closer to God. And just going to a restaurant generally doesn't do that.
That's right, and you're exactly right. It doesn't. A lot of times, it's not done right. And I hold both church leadership, pastoral, and laity responsible for that. But the average person looking for something that they may not know how to name that, you bear the responsibility too. You have to show up. You have to put yourself in that position. Now, what I mean about the church is that we struggle sometimes with curriculum that helps us get to the heart of scripture, or helps us deal with topics that are particularly meaningful or particularly challenging for us in this particular time. For instance, what churches are actually answering this kind of question for someone like your daughter? I mean, where are those communities where you can ask those questions of one another? And what are you doing? What's worked for you? Or tell me why this did not work for you. So we've struggled at trying to reach everybody, though we are all in a different place in our spiritual journey, intelligence wise, but also experience wise. So we struggle with that. But if you won't show up, it won't ever change either. But I would tell you that I have been in some 12-step rooms where it felt more like church, when we were honest with one another, when we were held accountable, but also responsible for holding others too in their journey in life. Um, because often in church, we don't tell the truth to ourselves, to another person, or to God, because we're afraid we'll be found out.
Present
When
our
all of
best.
us are really failures.
Right. We dress up and we sit
Hmm.
straight up and we pretend that our family gets along, and then you
Right.
get in a station wagon and start yelling at your kids.
Yes.
So imagine, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Imagine you had a broadcast. Imagine that 20 million people were going to see what you're about to say.
Woo.
For the next minute, if you could just directly speak to somebody in my daughter's situation who say, they're in their mid 20s, they're not particularly religious, they're struggling financially, and they don't see a way out, what would you tell them? And you can take some time to think. You don't have to answer right away.
Um, I think most individuals at that stage of life are at this place where they're really feeling the pinch of making a decision about where I will work, whether it's career or not, but where am I going to begin to really invest my time? Or they've already pursued education, and are about to make some kind of a transition. And so the question then becomes, can I um, well, instead of forming it that way, let me go back and say this. One of the things I hated the most about junior high and high school was that threat of something going on your permanent record. And then I never heard another thing about the permanent record. After I graduated and so from high school. And so there are so many opportunities for there to be a bend in the path or another off ramp or another on ramp to something else. And so the counselor in me would want everybody that's in the same spot that your daughter is in to think about this. There is not one right, perfect choice. God is not crossing fingers and holding the divine breath, hoping that you're going to make the choice that God has already imbued you with the power to do. There is a way for you to make an impact wherever you are, whatever you do, whatever choice you make. God can make something and will make something good of that. That's why I think it's important for us to really consider, then if this is something I'm investing myself in, then what have I got to give to other people that will only multiply, so that I'm not choosing to give to this arena of work or to give to my family. There's not an either or. It's about giving in such a way to your work that it only enlivens you in the way that you then also can give to your family. That to say is, we do have finite energy levels. You have to also be responsible enough to rest when it's time to rest, to take care of yourself so that you can give in all of the ways that God is giving us opportunity. But being trying to figure out, is that, am I meant to be a doctor? Or am I meant to be an artist? Am I meant to be? You are meant to be a child of God. And so I am a child of God who happens to be an artist, a child of God who happens to be a teacher, a child of God who happens to be an engineer. And there are many ways for you to live out that giftedness as an engineer when you think about things in such an orderly and formulaic or linear fashion. To be able to look at the components and how they all work together, or the same thing with artists, with color and form and movement, and there are so many ways that God can use that giftedness, that I don't want anybody to feel like they're stuck in this one thing.
Mm-hmm.
That, matter of fact, I think speaks more loudly to, I'm really trying to please somebody else in my life, or I'm doing this for the money.
Mm-hmm.
And that will not lead to a sense of satisfaction, that sweet spot when I'm able to teach or give, or um, simply to exchange energy with the rest of the universe. It's not going to feel like it's an equal exchange, and that there's somehow a flow that even feeds that process, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think that it's interesting you mentioned these bends. That's actually a very good message for people to take in, that you're not stuck on a straight road. And in fact, if you talk to most successful people, they have taken many turns in their career. It's rare that you go to one company and stay there for 50 years or whatever. I think that if you're stuck in a place where on a day-to-day basis it's not fulfilling, and even maybe you hate it, maybe it makes you miserable,
Right.
that's a very difficult place from which to notice that bend, because if you are basically you're resisting all the time, and the definition of suffering, Eckhart Tolle said, is suffering is being here and wanting to be there. So I think step one to noticing that bend in the road that would be a good detour for you to take is to stop being miserable where you are in any way that you can.
Yes.
Because and there are some jobs that are terrible, and there's some jobs that are abusive, and of course I'm not saying that you should withstand that abuse, but simply going to work and dreaming all day long about doing something other than what's right in front of you is a recipe for spending decades. I've done it before.
Right.
Decades of your life resisting and fighting something, when if you just say, this is what I'm doing right now, I'm going to try to do the best I can in this spot and see if there's opportunities to serve God and serve my family and serve other people around me in this spot, which may be not ideal. Then I think those other opportunities start showing themselves.
That's right. In one of the Gospels, I have Easter on the brain because that's kind of where we're planning and working toward in my work right now. And when you're talking about being miserable where you are, I love this quote. I don't know who. Probably 12 million people have said it, so I don't know who to attribute to that. But to be where your feet are, that's what it means for us to be in the present. Be where your feet are. And if you're miserable, there's still something that you can do. And so, as we prepare for Easter, we already know the story well enough. We know that there is something going to happen on Easter morning for those women who were halted in their work. They knew the thing they wanted to do, and that was what was most appropriate was to be able to honor Jesus's life by tending to his dead body, and they could not do that during the Sabbath, during Passover, because that was against the law. So they are waiting for that moment still to come. And when it was time to move, to be where their feet are, and they were walking this path in one of the Gospels, and forgive me, I can't remember which one right now, but they're wondering how are we going to deal with that stone that's in front of the grave? But they were walking anyway,
Mm,
putting one foot in front
mm,
of the other. They were right there where they were, in a mix of grief, but also a mixed with relief that they finally get to do for Jesus what was a privilege to be able to do, an honor and a sign of respect and love for him. I don't know how that's going to work out, but we're moving toward that grave site anyway, never once expecting the kind of turn that would happen when they arrived and found that the tomb was empty. So being where our feet are is the only thing that we've got to work with. Um, but it's not about staying stuck. That's often we feel like our only choice is to just stay here. But if we're willing to work through it, now we're going to have to feel the grief. We're going to have to make some decisions and to push a little bit. But I believe that God will meet us where we are and give us the insight that's greater than our own experience or education. Will give us the courage beyond our own experience so far, so that maybe that bend becomes a little more recognizable. But it's not going to show up until we're at the bend.
yep. Yeah, it's beginning to become clear, this picture that you're painting, which is that it's not about God giving you a Cadillac. It's about remaining open to the twists and turns, some good, some bad, the suffering that's ahead, and having faith that the bend is there, even though you can't see it. That if you just continue taking the next best step you can, that those things, like the stone moving away from the tomb, and that's something that I've had in my life happen time after time. Things that I just considered were completely impossible. As long as you psych yourself out and think that it's not going to happen, it probably won't. But if you for a minute just say, I'm going to just take care of what's right in front of me.
Mhm.
When we get to that point, I trust that something is going to open up, and the right thing will open up, even though it may be a different right thing. It might be something different than what I expect or anticipate or wish for.
And I think what opens up the vista that begins to open up, and we can see that there is a slight bend that's coming up ahead, happens when I realize it's not all my responsibility. I really can trust God. My responsibility right now is where my feet are. And I have to, well, in the case of someone like your daughter, I've got these bills to pay. I've got maybe a child to care for. I've got decisions that I need to make about things. But if we allow the list to become so long that it has today's things on it, but also tomorrow's and next month's and 2 years from now, then I am depending on my own insight, wisdom, power, discernment. I'm depending just on myself. But if I take care of this, what's the next best step? And can acknowledge that God is with me on this journey, that the bend will appear when it's time, then I'll be ready for it as well. But if I'm trying to do it all on my own, and it starts with making those horrific decisions that feel like you're jumping off a cliff, um, but you're not in this alone. We're not in this alone.
Yep. So that overwhelm comes from thinking you have to do it every step yourself. You have to get every decision right. You have to make every move. You have to have all the energy yourself. That is overwhelming. And, realizing that, that at some point, that feeling out and living out that balance between Jesus take the wheel and I'm going to get up in the morning and work hard and accomplish this myself. That
Yep.
balance is critical. And you've heard that joke about the guy that was drowning, and he prayed, he said, "Lord, save me, I'm drowning."
Mm-hmm.
And a little ship came by, and they tried to pull him out of the water. He said, "No, I'm waiting for the Lord to help." And it happened a couple more times, and finally the guy died and went to heaven. And he said, "Lord, why didn't you keep me from drowning?" He said, "Didn't you see the ship I sent you?"
That's exact. That's exactly right. And often we can't see what the rescue is. We don't see the deliverance because we have created a scenario in our mind of how things must be in order for us to get out of what feels like a mess. The problem that we also don't is that we don't receive the grace that is being offered us in every moment
Yes.
because we're outside of that moment trying to prepare for what's coming next, and we miss the very best of what's in this moment.
Yep. And
Um,
that's a perfect segue to the next topic I was going to bring up, which is one thing that I've found very useful in my life is this idea of visioning and spending some time thinking about what you want to create in your life consciously. And actually, I mean, literally sitting for 30 minutes and reflecting about what you want the next year, the next 3 years, the next 5 years to be. So I'll tell you that I've been doing this for a long time, and it's uncanny how many of the material things have come to light just from me putting the idea in my head and then forgetting about it. And that's not me. That's not me clamoring and clawing and scratching. That's something else bringing those things once I've said, this is what I want to create in my life. And I know that it's not all me. I'm going to sit back and let some of this come in my direction.
right.
And so there's one tweak I made since, I guess, December the 7th was when I was baptized of 24. I'll never forget that date.
Glorious
I'm,
day.
I'm terrible with dates, but you remember that date, and I do too. I'll never forget that date. But I have this beautiful vision card, which I'll share with you at some point, that basically lays out, what I want my day-to-day life to be like, what my relationships I want, and finances, all those things. One day it occurred to me that I didn't have God in there anywhere, and it was just a shocking thing. And I think it was somewhere maybe a week or two before my baptism, because I guess I was thinking about God a lot. And so I made one tweak to my vision board, and that is I start it now with the word God, and I start it with reset. I can't remember the exact words. I read it every morning, but I'm drawing a blank. But the idea is that I start with this breath, and I say the breath is being able to take a breath when you first open your eyes in the morning is a gift from God. That's something that, and it starts with something that simple. And then you start going out and say, okay, now I've got a roof over my head. I have a glass of water waiting for me in the kitchen if I want it. I have a wife that's loving. I have a car with which to drive to work. And so those are the material things, but you start expanding out and you realize that every atom, every wave of light, everything in the universe is because of God's grace. And to pull away from that and think, when you first wake up in the morning, instead think, oh my gosh, I've got to do my taxes, and I got to pay my bills, and the tires on my car need to be changed, and being embroiled in that instead of realizing, if I can sit up in bed and take a breath, that's such a gift from God that really it can only get better from there.
That's right. And think about your focus, all the things that you just mentioned there, Faramarz. When I'm thinking about taxes, when I'm thinking about my tires, when I'm thinking about those things, it's me, my life, my decisions, my responsibilities. It's all on me. But when I stop to think, I didn't do anything to create that breath except receive it. I mean, truly take it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't do anything to make that water, and it's glorious that there's so many other people who don't have that security in their life. Uh, that gratitude is a moving away from all that I am responsible for or that I have to do. That's that feeling of overwhelm again, everything kind of bearing down on us. And I don't know that I can't carry that. But to think about all that I have been given and I didn't ask for it, I never even thought about it. I can either move towards, well, I'm scum of the earth because I just take advantage of it. That's all I do is use. Or I can choose in that moment to be grateful for all of it, even that God would be patient with somebody as selfish as me.
Yeah. Yeah. Jordan Peterson says that the degree to which you're self-conscious and self-absorbed is how depressed and anxious you are. He said self-consciousness and narcissism is indistinguishable from anxiety and depression. It's the
Oh, wow.
same. It's the same thing. So the solution to overwhelm is to get out of the me mentality and go out and help someone else, do something else,
That's
serve
right.
somebody else, think
Right.
about somebody else. Easy to say.
It it is easy. It is easy to say. I One thing that has really made a difference in my life. I don't. There are a lot of seminaries now that don't expect that you. They don't require that you take Hebrew or Greek, but the Greek language is so fascinating to me because most of us read Scripture as if it was written in English
Mm,
because we're reading from an English Bible. But one of the greatest things I think I've ever learned about that language is that joy, though it means happiness, it's it's what it comes from. Joy comes from grace being recognized in my life. That really is the definition of it. It does mean happy. However, it's the deeper and the more alive it is, it's because I have recognized the grace of God somewhere in my life, and God loves me. God companions me. It's something coming to me. And so my joy and my gratitude begins with realizing all that I have received before I then make those decisions about what I'm going to give, um, or, or what expectations I think I'm ready to live by. That would help that decision process too about what I'm supposed to do with my life. What is it that I can do and be?
yeah. Have you heard of Arthur Brooks? You know who he is?
Yes.
Yeah. So I listened to him give a talk the other day, and he had this beautiful way of looking. He said, if you're unhappy, you need to change your want strategy. Not your it Being unhappy is not a problem with your have strategy. It's a problem with your want strategy. So in other words, you can have, I think he told a story. Oh yeah, his wonderful story. I just pulled it up, but about this guy he knew whose dream it was to be able to pay cash for a car, and so finally he'd saved up all this money and he walked into the Mercedes dealership and slapped down the cash, and he said as he was driving off in his brand new Mercedes that was fully paid, the thought in his head was, damn, I should have waited another year. I could have gotten a Ferrari. So, that,
Yes,
yeah, that's a problem with the want strategy is causing the problem. It's
that's
like,
right.
and so that exactly
That's
what you're saying is, you can make
right.
yourself miserable or you can make yourself joyful and be in the
Right.
same situation.
Right. One of the things we do this, at least in our church, we pray this prayer communally every week. We close our time of prayer with reciting the Lord's Prayer together, how we're taught by Jesus. That's a very rabbinical thing to have done for the disciples to say, teach us how to pray. How is it that we should be looking at things? How should we be engaging with God? How do we ask for things? Teach us how to do that. And when he gets to the part about daily bread, if you know anything about the history of the Israelites, then you know about manna being provided in the wilderness. God provided food where there was no food. And so something would have clicked in their minds. Most of them would have known about that from their ancestors throughout all these many generations. But daily bread also means that I don't hoard what I need for next week or next year. But I get just what I need. We've got to do the hard work of knowing the difference between our needs and our wants. It impacts our gratitude, it impacts our joy, it impacts this feeling of overwhelm when I'm expecting too much, when my focus is not where my feet are, but someplace else, or even in a time that never will be.
So that's, we're not on a level playing field. You and I are old enough to remember the days before internet. So really the most we had to deal with was magazine ads and television ads.
Yes.
But we, I think that the younger generations are up against a force that is, maybe we can resist it better than they can, but the force that's constantly preying on that tendency we have to be negative and to feel lack. And it's to sell us things. You need this drug to lose weight. If you get this particular car, then you're going to be happy. If you get this face
Right.
cream and the under eye bags will go away.
Right.
And now they're amplified to the point where you could shut it down before by turning off your television, or you just didn't have to pick up a magazine, you could pick up a book instead. But now it comes at you in every time you open an email, every time you are online, every time you
Yes.
order something on Amazon. And so that, I don't know if you have any words of advice for people that are younger than us who are getting kind of eaten up by that. What would you
Right.
tell them?
We're going to have to do the hard work of protecting our hearts and our minds. God is trusting us with ourselves. And by that, I mean, I am blessed that I have a lot of people in my life who love me, but their primary responsibility is not to take care of me. That's my job. God has entrusted me with Sandra. So I'm going to have to make some tough decisions in my life when I feel drawn to just veg for a minute. I've got lots of choices. I can sit and doom scroll or I could close my eyes and pray, but that's going to very quickly move into a nap. I already know. There are lots of choices that I can make. And unfortunately, if I am serious about caring for myself as a trust that God has placed in me, then I've got to shut out all of that noise. I've got to go to a different place. Jesus did that time and time again. He went away from the crowds. Sometimes it was up to the top of the mountain, sometimes it was just away from the crowds, but he had to get away from the clamoring. There are also two particular times in scripture where we know even though he was tired, he stayed there in the fray. So I don't know what the magic is in trying to decide when that time is for you that you go to the mountain anyway, or you stay at the work anyway. But I have to trust that if Jesus was able to discern that, he's going to help us who are of lesser capacity to do the same thing. That means we've got to be aware of the kind of voices that are clamoring for our ear. One of my favorite verses is this: no weapon formed against you shall prosper. What what the enemy may form and shoot at me is not the same kind of arrow that's going to work for you, and that's not the same kind of arrow that's going to could pierce the heart of your daughter. But we already know then that if we are aligned with God, if we are yielded to him, if it's his spirit living in this temple along with my own spirit, then that weapon is rendered useless. It's powerless. It does not have the effect to be my undoing. But there are some things that have to happen first before I know that. And it's just to make those decisions, and we make them better when we are in community.
Right. Right. So that, I think, this may be a good place to end, but this idea of if you tell somebody that's overwhelmed and doesn't see a way out that, oh, just go to church, that'll help, they're going to laugh, but because the first reaction I would have if someone told me that, and if I had a dead end job and lots of bills and no education or whatever your situation is, it seems hopeless, is, are they going to give me the answer in church? Does Jesus tell me how to solve this problem? But I think the answer to that reaction is no, but you will better find the answer in community. And
Right.
you're much more likely to find it surrounded with support and love than you are sitting and looking on your computer at home by yourself.
That's right. So can I go back and give it one more shot
Well, of
at
course.
this? If your daughter were here in my office,
Yeah, we'll edit the other one
or
out.
well, no, let's go at it both ways. But here's the thing: is so if she really were in front of me, then this is what I would say. I don't have any answers for you. I don't, I can tell you what's worked in my life, but I also can tell you that I'm willing to walk with you because I've had people walk with me and it made all the difference in the world. And so I would offer, it's easier, I get paid to do this. So I know that it's easier sometimes for me to do this than for others, but you'll only get better at it if you practice. I'm willing to pray with your daughter or with whoever is feeling that overwhelm. I'm willing to say the words out loud and to ask God for blessing, because girlfriend is tired of trying to find the right words. And then I don't just go to church. Why don't you come to church with me? Or let's get together every week and let's start to build community with one another so that that person can know that they are not alone. And maybe you're the person that needs to ask for somebody to do that with you. Um, there are all kinds of ways to get at it, but you don't have to have one right answer. That's where I kind of started, but you also can ask for what you need from community, so that you've got it's like an extra dose of power.
Mm-hmm.
You is that
I'm getting some kind of error
I
message
got a
here.
phone.
Was that
Oh,
what it is?
I got a phone call coming through. I didn't do my do not disturb
Yeah,
on long
it
enough.
just temporarily stopped you recording. So that I think we're getting to some concrete help, and Also, a lot of us we grow up in this stoic mode where we don't want to ask for help because it's a sign of weakness. But and I'm certainly, I'm not preaching. I certainly have that problem. Like I don't, I try to be very independent. But when we do that, if you accept the premise that helping someone else actually makes you better inside, or makes you more joyous, or gives you the opportunity to lift yourself up by helping somebody else. If if you allow yourself to ask for help, you're giving another human being the opportunity to feel better about themselves also.
Yes. And it is so many different, there's so many different levels of intricacy in relationship that are offered there. Not only are you giving them a chance to feel better about themselves, you're giving them a chance to practice what God
Mm,
intended in the first place,
right.
and that is, all I have to offer is what I have learned in my own life. And the don't do it this way lessons are just as important and as helpful as the this worked out pretty good lessons. And so if you are willing to be vulnerable enough to ask me what worked for you, what didn't work for you, or how did you manage this time, it gives me an opportunity to practice being at a different level in my relationship with God, in my relationship with myself, in understanding what my intelligence is. I mean, it gives me a chance to kind of step up to the platform where I am really in life. And who doesn't need the practice?
Hmm. And that's that going back to that energy that you mentioned, that when you get into community, and when you I think very early on in our discussion you said that when you are listening for God's direction, and making these choices that seem overwhelming, there's this extra little push that you feel, extra energy that you feel. That's a very real thing that you can give to someone by lending them a hand and lifting them up and showing that you care how things turn out for them. And it's a very contagious thing, because you do that for somebody else. And just to, I'll give you a quick example of this new hospital I've been working in that is turning out to be a wonderful place. But um, I'm used to walking into a hospital and no one even looks up. The nurses, when you need help or whatever, because they know that if they make eye contact with you, that they're going to have to do something. And so it's
That's
just
right.
easier to keep staring at, pretending like they don't see you. Well,
It's
this,
the same in the church, brother. It's the same in the
I think it
church.
is. Same at the fast food place. It's all the same. But in this
Yeah,
hospital, I noticed really quickly that when you ask for help, that not only do they direct you in the right direction, they get up from the chair and take you there. So if I say, I need a piece of gauze, they don't say, oh, it's 50 yards that way, looking, take a right, left, and then you'll see the room, and then
yes,
send you away from them, and maybe you'll find it, maybe you won't. They get up from their chair and walk you over there. And I don't know who started that policy, but I'll tell you that what it results in is the end game of that result is I give better care to the patient, because I'm like, it's not, instead of me being frustrated and it sucking my energy, I go, oh, somebody cares about how my day goes. And the first thing you do is you turn around and you hand that energy to somebody else. And
that's right.
and that's community. So that if
And isn't it interesting? This is Jesus's whole strategy. It's different with every person how he engages them, but the invitation is the same, and that is, follow me. I'll show you where the gauze is. I'll show
how
you where this
interesting.
is.
I didn't even
I'll
make
show
that
you where this
connection.
is.
Yeah.
But
I,
it's follow me.
yeah.
He's willing to show what he already knows, what he's already experienced, what he already believes. And so the following part of this apprenticeship really is about that very thing that you were talking about. Somehow
Yeah.
I got chosen. He chose 12 people who had not been chosen by a rabbi to study. They were grown men. They were already living in another career. They were all second career. If you want to consider their ministry as another career, some might consider it just a bend in the road. They were still fishermen, but they were fishermen who really had passion about something else. But the approach is a little bit different, but his invitation is always the same. Come on, I'll show you.
So maybe that's the advice you give to the 20 million people. It's instead of giving somebody, if you're feeling hopeless yourself, help somebody else in that way, and not help somebody by giving them a list of 3 things they need to do, but take them and show them. And follow me is a beautiful.
Yes.
I kind of walked into that without even making the connection that that's exactly what Jesus says. Jesus doesn't say, sit down and I'll tell you 4 things that you need to do.
Right.
He just says it's very simple. Just follow me and I'll get you
Right.
there. Yeah. What a beautiful, I think that's a fantastic place to end, actually.
Yeah.
Because that we've solved one big problem that I presented to you at the beginning, which was, what do you
That's
tell
right.
people in that situation? You say, follow Jesus, and then,
Right.
yep, beautiful.
That's right. It's going to take a while, but it's a beautiful, beautiful journey.
Excellent. Well, all
Yay.
right. I think that's a wrap. We've been talking for over an hour. Wow.